Hi everyone. Here we're going to start talking about minerals, the different mineral properties, and how we can actually distinguish minerals apart from each other and to determine which mineral is which from just looking at it and doing a series of mineral identification tests. So here we're going to learn how geologists organize minerals, as well as learn about some of the common or most common minerals, and then learn how to identify minerals based on their different properties. So one thing to start with is what we call polymorphs. So polymorphs are two different minerals that have the same chemical composition, but a different atomic structure. So a polymorph really tells us and shows us the importance of the way that minerals are structured. So for example, a polymorph is a diamond and graphite. So diamond and graphite being what we use for pencil lead, they are chemically exactly the same. They're made of carbon. So they are made of the same material. The difference is the way that they are structured atomically. So diamond has very, very, very strong bonds and is our hardest mineral, whereas graphite has very weak bonds and is one of our softest minerals. So they are chemically the same. They're made of the same material. However, it's the ordering of the formation, the way their atoms are actually ordered, that cause them to be different and cause them to be significantly different. So that is what we call polymorphs. So they can be a little tricky. If you were looking at just the chemical composition, you would not be able to tell these items apart. So when we look at the physical properties of minerals, we're looking at the characteristics that we can determine from dealing with this mineral or dealing with, say, a hand sample, a piece of this mineral that can actually fit in your hand. There's really unique sets of physical properties for each mineral. So some of the things we look at are color, streak, luster, hardness, and cleavage or fracture. So for example, this is pyrite, and it grows in cubic crystals. It has a black streak. It's very metallic. It has a metallic luster. It sometimes has a sulfur smell, and this is also known as fool's gold. So pyrite is known as fool's gold. So looking at it, you might not be able to tell gold apart from pyrite, but when you get into these other physical properties, you can learn that they are, in fact, not the same. So for example, this might look like gold. It is actually pyrite. One of the ways to determine that is to do a streak test, which is where we take the mineral and we draw a line on what we call a streak plate. And we've realized that pyrite has a grayish streak, which is not the same as what we would expect from gold. We also see that pyrite is harder than gold. Gold is much softer. So just looking at it, you might not be able to tell them apart, but when you get into these other physical properties, you learn that what you thought was going to make you very, very rich is actually just pyrite. So how do we go about telling these minerals apart? So it's a long process. I shouldn't say long, I should say it's a multi-step process to determine which mineral is which. There are certain characteristics which we call diagnostic that are very distinct and very reliable, things that are not tricky. It's very black and white, very clear, the answer for that particular identification. Whereas there are also other features of a mineral which are ambiguous. So the most common one here is color, meaning you might be looking at a white mineral sample. It's the color white. You have no idea that there are other versions of that same exact mineral that come in other colors. So that is not something ambiguous. That is not something diagnostic. You cannot necessarily rely on color to help you identify the mineral. You're going to have to look at other factors about that mineral to help you determine what it is. So the physical properties that we look at, I have listed here. I'm going to go through them each so that you understand what it is exactly that we're looking at for each of these physical properties. So the first one is color. So I mentioned that this can be quite ambiguous and should not be relied on. That is because this here is a picture of 3 different pieces of quartz. These are the same mineral. They are quartz. However, they look very different. One is white, one is pink, and one is clear. So if you were going by color only, trying to figure out what is this white mineral, you might not realize that it is the same as your pink mineral sample that you have here. So color is not always the best thing to rely on when trying to identify a mineral. And then we also have what we call streak. So streak is when you rub the mineral along a streak plate here, which is white, and you see what color the mineral leaves behind. So hematite, for example, is a dark black mineral, but it leaves a reddish-brown streak. So some minerals leave a streak the same color as the mineral. Some are very different, like this one, for example. But you wouldn't know until you actually scratch it on a streak plate. We also have luster. So luster is has to do with how does the mineral look. So there are many different ways to label luster. The main difference in what we're going to focus on in this class is just metallic or non-metallic. So pyrite, for example, is metallic. It is shiny. It reflects light off of its faces, whereas feldspar, we have here 2 examples of feldspar. These are not metallic, so it is not shining or glimmering in the light. There are some other ways to talk about luster. Earthy, waxy, pearly, but we are not going to get too much into the details of luster as much as we will say, is the mineral metallic or non-metallic? So for example, here we have a metallic mineral. These 2 are metallic. This is metallic, whereas these others are non-metallic. So for example, these 2 are not reflecting light. The next physical property is hardness. So this is a very, very, very good physical property to use when you're trying to identify minerals. Hardness is essentially the ability of that mineral to scratch or be scratched by something else. So the resistance of that crystal structure, how hard is the mineral? So we use what we call Mohs hardness scale. So it's a scale, it goes from 1 to 10, 1 being very, very soft, 10 being hard. So 10 is diamond, the hardest mineral. Don't have any samples of that in the classroom, unfortunately. So what we do is we use certain things that we know their hardness. So a fingernail, a coin, glass, and then steel, so often a nail. So what we do is we take our mineral sample and we scratch it with our fingernail. If the mineral can be scratched by our fingernail, that means the mineral is softer than our fingernail. So we know fingernails are about 2.5 on the scale. So if the mineral is scratched easily by your finger, you know that the hardness of your mineral is less than that of a fingernail. So it's going to be a 1 or a 2. If you take another mineral sample and you cannot scratch it with your fingernail, you know it's going to be harder than your fingernail. So the next thing you would do is, okay, you scratch it with your coin. It also cannot be scratched by a copper coin, so you know it is harder than a copper coin. Whereas then you scratch it with a piece of glass, and the mineral can be scratched by glass. So you rub the glass along the mineral, and the mineral, the glass leaves a mark, or leaves a scratch. You know that your mineral is going to be somewhere in between the copper coin and the glass. So it's less hard than the glass, but it is harder than the copper coin. So it's going to be at about a 4 or a 5 on the scale. The next is called crystal habit. So this is where we get into the crystal shapes. So what is the actual shape of the crystals as they grow. So this depends on the arrangement of the atoms within the mineral and within each crystal. So for example, galena grows in a cube. Kyanite grows in more needle-like shapes. So depending on the internal arrangement of those atoms, you will be able to see the different shapes in those minerals and in those individual crystals, as long as they have grown uninterrupted. So next we have cleavage. So cleavage is what shape does the mineral break into if you were to break it. So fracture is how the mineral breaks, so sort of the plane that the mineral breaks in. And then cleavage is, we think, does the mineral have cleavage or not? So if the mineral does have cleavage, that means that when the mineral fractures or breaks, it breaks into very distinct shapes. It's going to break into the natural shape of that mineral. So for example, this is mica. Mica is a sheet silicate, so it actually breaks in sheets. So if you were to drop mica on the ground, it's going to break off into little pieces that are sheets. This is halite here, which we've talked about before. It grows cubic. If you were to drop halite on the ground and it were to break, it would break into teeny tiny little perfect cubes. So these minerals have cleavage. When they break into their preferred shape. Minerals that don't have cleavage, it means that the bonds in the mineral are strong in every direction, or they're equally strong in every direction, so there's no preferred fracture, there's no preferred breakage. So we can have a regular fracture where it just looks pretty messy, like a garnet, or quartz has conchoidal fracture, which looks like it breaks like a glass would. But if you were to drop these samples on the ground, they're not going to break into their specific crystal habit shape. They're going to break very randomly. So most minerals have cleavage and are going to break along their specific atomic structure lines. So then there are also some important physical properties. So there are physical properties that are what we just call special properties because they are not common in all minerals, but you should always test for them. So some being, does the mineral react with acid? Is it magnetic? Does it taste salty? Does it have striations, which are like stripes or ribbed lines on it? And then the specific gravity or its weight. So is it super, super heavy or is it super, super light? So these are the things that are going to help you determine which mineral is which. So looking at all of these different things, including those special properties, will allow you to determine, is it halite or is it calcite? Is it pyrite, which is fool's gold, or is it real gold? So in the lab this week, you're going to be doing all of these different tests on many different minerals to determine which is which.